You ready, babe?
I guess. This one's a hard one to be ready for.
I understand. We'll just do our best.
Okay.
New format, folks. Hope you like it.
Last episode, we kind of tore through 8 years in a kind of real quick timeline fashion. Now we're going to go underneath, see what was going on during those 8 years. Feelings, problems, struggles, all of that. This is the hard stuff. And this is the stuff that haven't really shared. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to bring up. It's hard to think about it again. It's hard to, I know it causes a lot of stress for Brian. So this is a hard one. So hang with us, be kind, and we're going to dive into it.
Yeah, I'm going to struggle with this episode. We prepared for it, but it's going to be, it was hard to read these things. It's going to be hard to hear them, but we're doing it on purpose. I'm glad that you're telling your story. I know you want me to chime in at certain points. I'll try to do that graciously. I don't want to override you telling your story here. So let's bring the demons to light.
Let's do it. So I want to say first that this video, we're doing this first to help us heal, to work through some of this stuff, bring it to light again, and process it. But also, our second reason for this is to help someone else. If you may be feeling something similar or dealing with something similar, to find hope that you can work through this, there is hope. So what was going on during those 8 years other than jobs and having kids and all of that kind of stuff? Well, one of the key things was Brian was very angry. He had rage reactions fairly frequently. Never knew what would set him off or how to help calm him down. I was walking on eggshells whenever he was home. The kids, as they got older, started to do the same. I felt like I needed to protect him from being triggered. So trying to keep the kids quiet or whatever so that he could do whatever it was without getting upset. And if he did get upset, I felt like that was my fault. I didn't do enough to keep the trigger from happening. This brought a lot of resentment and exhaustion for me. I would avoid possible conflict as much as possible. But then once I got involved in these situations, it generally got worse. Because I would get emotional right along with Brian, and it just went downhill.
Mm-hmm.
I believed, and still do struggle with this, that I could calm his anger with logic. I would apply logic to minimize the issue or explain it away so that, oh, it's not that big a deal. You don't have to get angry about this. Or try to fix it for him. So if something would happen, I just, go and scurry around trying to fix the things. So maybe his anger would get less. And time and again, that didn't actually work. Brian's PTSD affected my feelings towards myself. I would feel inadequate. I'd feel guilty. If only I were a better wife or mother, if I could handle his symptoms better, he wouldn't be so angry. So I took it on to myself to fix this. And Brian would try to explain to me in his moments of what was going on. And he really honestly was doing a good job, but I just didn't understand. I didn't know what to do with that information. And he would tell me that he'd be in the fire room. That was his way of describing what was going on for him. But I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to help. I just wanted to disengage. But then he'd feel abandoned and he'd get worse, with more negative thoughts and all this piling down on him. And so I felt stuck.
I'll try to explain the fire room. It didn't happen at first, but over the years, eventually my anger got so bad that I lost control of it. There's a lot that contributed to this, including my undiagnosed PTSD, a lack of self care for several years. There's generational patterns of anger that I learned when I was growing up. Just the fact that it's more socially acceptable for a guy to get angry than it is to cry. And also, I'd lacked emotional regulation skills, but that's another story. To be honest, I hated getting angry. I didn't want to get angry. And I really wanted to know why I got angry. For me, if I knew why, then I could stop it, then I could change something. And the problem with trying to know why then is that it took me days to recover from getting tossed in the fire room, and by then I couldn't recall the situation well enough to get any answers out of it. I tried, it didn't work. So the fire room, I actually wrote a short story about it that I'm trying to get published because I think it'll help lots of veterans specifically. Um, but what would happen is anger would come along and throw me into the fire room and then take my place in the situation. And the walls were solid metal, seamless metal, and they were on fire. And the ceiling was miles high. You couldn't even see it. The floor was, baked stone that you couldn't get through. The only thing in the room were two windows that were super thick. You couldn't break them. You couldn't yell through them. All I could do was sit there in the fire room and watch anger destroy my life. Out those windows, I would watch anger hurt my family. I would watch anger hurt me, my body, watch it break things, watch it scream. And when I was finally set free from the fire room, there was no reconciling. And I would just withdraw into myself, guilt and shame, and try to fix myself. Obviously, it was me doing all of these things, being angry and behaving badly, but that's not what it felt like inside of me. I'm not excusing anything, my actions are still my responsibility, but it was pretty awful on my end, too.
Thanks for explaining the fire room a little better.
You're welcome.
It was those descriptions that gave me glimpses of what was going on, and that there was a struggle. I still didn't understand how to help, but it gave me hope, even in those moments of not knowing what to do. So a little more of what was going on. In general, Friday nights were hard. Brian would come home after working, hard all week. And it just felt like he would just do what he wanted to do, kind of disregarding anything going on with the family. Sometimes there was loud music until late at night. He tended to drink more on Fridays. We'd try to hang out. We'd do dance party and stuff for a little while. But it would get late, and I'd be the one getting the kids to bed and sleep. Our house is not one that... It's a very open concept house, and so the music is, blaring up right into their rooms. And he would just kind of get stuck in his own mind and feelings, and didn't quite know where he was with his emotions, and didn't know what was going to come out, honestly.
The music helped pull the emotions out, and I knew that had to happen. but I didn't know what to do with them once they came out. I guess I hoped that pulling them out would be like pulling weeds. Um, it didn't work that way. Um, the problem was that the process was unpredictable. I never knew what was going to come out, be it rage or sorrow or guilt. Just didn't know. Caused chaos.
Those were some late nights.
Yeah.
I also hated Saturdays because we had late nights on Fridays oftentimes, so I was tired. And it was our sleep in day, but with babies, there really wasn't sleeping in for me anyway, and so I would spend the morning trying to keep the little ones quiet so that Brian could sleep in. Um, wait for him to get up and get some coffee on board and maybe not be quite as grouchy. Um, we do a large breakfast, late morning, and the kids would be getting antsy because they've been up for a while. They're hungry. Brian would be in a bad mood. Um, Usually we ended up with arguments on Saturdays. It just seemed like every Saturday on schedule, something would set someone off and down we'd go. And then Sundays were kind of hit or miss. We might have recovered on Saturday and we might still be dealing with fallout from the weekend. There were times where we were arguing in the car all the way to church, and then, Brian would want a nap in the afternoon to try to recover from all of this stuff. And the kids would always be making some noise of some sort. And so it usually didn't go well. He usually got woken up and would be grumpy again. And so weekends in general were really hard for quite a while.
And one of the big reasons they were hard is that during the week, I would lose myself in work, in physical labor. My job was tree work, it was very demanding, and I would just run myself ragged. And that helped me feel a little better. You get those, like runner endorphins, the whole marathon thing. Um, it helped lessen the pain, the anguish I was feeling, but I didn't take care of myself and recover. Weekends are supposed to be for rest and recovery, and I didn't do that. I had other work that I wanted to do on the weekends, and I would get drunk. And then you wake up Saturday and you're hungover. And what it amounts to is I was burning the candle with a blowtorch and expecting myself to get better. And when I was self employed, if I didn't have work, I would despair, feel a lot of shame for not bringing in enough money. And even when I started working at K State, the pay wasn't that great. And I, I felt shame for not bringing in enough money to support my family well enough. And my solution, what I learned growing up, was just work harder. That's how you fix things.
The last bit of kind of what was going on is kind of family, parenting, that part of it. The kids, they were young during this time frame. We had little kids for this whole time. We still have little kids. And goofing around was not okay. Sometimes the kids would be getting along and they'd be playing well and giggling and carrying on, and they'd get scolded for stop goofing because it was too loud. It was making noise. And so that was a really hard thing to come to terms with, hard for the kids just to be kids, and put me in a situation of what am I supposed to do? How do I keep you from being triggered? They're not whining and complaining, but they're making noise this way. And so it was this balancing act of constantly trying to figure out what's going to be the thing that's going to cause trouble. And parenting with someone with PTSD is hard. It's really hard. We try to support each other, when we're disciplining a kid, to not undermine the other. But there were times where I would step in because I didn't feel like Brian's response to whatever the kid had done was appropriate. I thought it was too much. It was too much anger or whatever, and I'd get in the middle of it, and it did not go well. It would turn into an argument, and it would get reflected at me, which was fine. I wanted it on me and not on the kids, and so that was really hard. That was a really hard time, and I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or not.
Everything you said is true. I still find it hard to hear these things. I'm still ashamed. Thank you, though, for standing up for our kids. And I mean that. That's been the biggest help in breaking this generational pattern of anger that I carry. It's humiliating to be so broken, but I have hope. We're getting better. Yeah.
Okay. As you can see, PTSD affects all of us. The kids, all of us. We all had to learn how to help each other, how to admit wrong, and to forgive. That was a big part of this time of our life, and we're still having to work hard at that, to understand. So that was kind of what was going on. Next, I kind of want to talk about what I was doing to cope. And I kind of think of this as my list of things a caregiver should not do, because I ended up kind of in a hole for myself. This was when things kind of felt really dark and lonely. I distanced myself from my friends and family. And why would I do that? Because I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want them thinking, oh gosh, we need to, save Alysia or whatever. We were okay. It just was hard. At least that's what the process was in my head. And through, talking with friends, it became evident that our struggles were not the normal relationship problems. We had some of that, of course, but ours just seemed a little bit different, and I would kind of get the look of, kind of the surprise, or that's not right, or whatever, and so I started to pull back. The other part of that was I really didn't have the energy for additional advice or judgment or criticism of our relationship. I already had enough, doubts and things going on in my head to have someone else telling me, and me trying to figure out if they were right, or, all this. I just wanted to figure it out by myself, and with Brian, mostly by myself. I keep things like this to myself and process and figure it out is my tendency. But I doubted myself during this time. I was asking myself questions like, what have I gotten myself into? Who am I becoming? What am I becoming? I had heard of women in bad relationships and thought, that won't happen to me. I won't let that happen to me. And I'm asking myself, well, am I in one of those relationships? Was I letting that happen to me? I didn't know. I felt swallowed by Brian's emotions, needs, and struggles. I felt like I was losing my personal identity for his sake, and to motherhood and caregiving, which I don't think that's uncommon. A lot of moms, I think, feel that in motherhood. And maybe that's all normal, but that's where I was at. I stopped doing things. I didn't do workouts. I stopped getting my hair cut as often. I didn't go very often to begin with, but now it was every 3 years when I'd go to get my hair cut. Stopped doing things I enjoyed. basically so that I had the space to take on whatever else needed to be taken on to try to keep things less chaotic or less angry or whatever in the household, trying to just keep the peace. So I stopped taking care of myself. I felt that I needed it, but I stopped doing it. I put that at the bottom of the priority list. At this point, fear was ruling. I was afraid to have people over because it might cause more stress. If Brian might not like it, or it would disrupt his plans, or would have to deal with his anger or anxiety. So I never would bring that up. He would often say, well, why don't we have those people over? And be like, oh, okay, we can have people over, but I wouldn't volunteer that. I didn't feel comfortable calling friends and family. I thought I might be disrupting Brian if I was talking on the phone or something. So I just kept pulling in to myself. I didn't feel like there was space for my needs or feelings. Even my physical space sometimes, it was something that I commented to Brian in the last few years. There was a long time where when Brian was walking through a space, like we all just got out of the way because I don't know if he was just in his own world or he just, what the deal was, but we just had to move because he was coming through. Whatever he was doing came first. And that has changed. He'll say, oh no, come on through. And that was not the way things were. And so even just physically, like I didn't feel like there was space for me.
There's nothing to say except I'm sorry. That doesn't fix anything. All I can do is get better and ask for forgiveness and live a better life. I I used to wish sometimes that dangerous things would happen so that I could show you and the kids and the community and everyone around me that I was a good person. I figured that if I could redeem myself by like saving the church from an active shooter, or rushing into a building and saving people and it was always and get injured in the process, if I could physically throw my body against something and get injured, then that would show you how much I actually cared. I was actually trying. I actually was a decent person inside. Um, what it amounts to is I was lost. I could feel the darkness inside. I just didn't know what to do. I did pray constantly. I had occasional glimpses of a better me. That habit of prayer kept hope alive inside of me, but it was the wrong perspective. It's the one I learned growing up and got reinforced throughout my life. If I could just be strong enough, things would get better. And in this case, what I needed was help. I did write lots of poetry during this time. That's one thing that also helped sustain me and get things out in a productive way. Was actually able to publish a book with a lot of that poetry in it. That was incredibly therapeutic. But all my other creative spark was gone. I used to love to cook. I didn't cook for years. I struggled to build anything, even just like wooden toys in the garage. I used to be pretty good at woodworking. I struggled with repair projects in the house and on the vehicles, and that's not me. That's not me at all. I couldn't even organize my garage. It's only been like 2 years now that I've had it organized, and we moved here 15 years ago. It's it. You don't see these things at the time. It's funny, but not funny, haha, to look back and see how bad things were.
You were reaching out for help. You were asking me for help, and I didn't know what to do, and I was tapped out. Um, and so yeah, we were in a tough place at that point.
We couldn't help ourselves.
Yeah. So throughout this process, I feel like I went through a series of thought processes that developed over time as I was trying to work through this time period. Um, there were a lot of feelings involved. I felt unheard. I was spending a lot of time caring for the kids. Would have a kid in a carrier all day. I was tired. Mom, 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 mom. And then, Brian would come home and he'd want my attention. And sometimes I just didn't have it in me, and he would feel neglected and hurt. And I just felt like I was failing. Um, that was really hard. I didn't ask for time to kind of recoup, and I think maybe I did try, probably not very well, and it didn't go well, and so I just stopped asking. I didn't take care of myself, and so I was not in good shape. I went through a phase there, and I think Brian did too, of, I don't like you. I love you, but I don't like you. Um,
Yep.
yeah. Brian told me at one point he didn't want to come home, from work. He would kind of take the long way home just because it was stressful being around each other for a while. We really were struggling. But for better for worse, we said our I do's and we loved each other, and love is hard. It is really hard. And so we just kept trying. And it wasn't pretty sometimes.
I have a friend who says that love is a verb. She's absolutely right. That's that aspect of our relationship that we have individually and as a couple kept doing. I don't like you, but I love you. I keep loving you. Even just little things that we do for each other have helped over the years. Like, I always get the door for you on the car whenever I'm going with you, just because I want to.
Yep. And there were, I made his lunch for, when he'd go out working, I'd make his lunch every day. And he had carpal tunnel really bad, especially when he had his business. And so every night he would ask if I could rub his arms. And I was so tired. And there were nights where I'm like, I don't want to rub your arms. I just want to go to sleep. But I love you, and I'm going to do this. And I did. And I don't know that I did it grudgingly. Always did it with love, but it was hard. Sometimes I just, I had to overcome my own wants there and push through.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was another thought process that was going on quite a bit during this time, of where I would tell myself, it'd be hard. I'd be struggling with something, be resentful or angry, frustrated, whatever, at Brian because of whatever was going on. And then I would tell myself, it could be worse. It could be worse. And I'd make up some crazy scenario, or not even crazy scenario, just it could be a lot harder. Stop acting like this. You need to pull it together. Your life is pretty good. And would try to diminish all my feelings there, essentially saying that I didn't have the right to have those feelings. He can have some physical injuries, unable to work, all sorts of things. And it took me a long time before I finally gave myself permission to be okay with my feelings. That, yeah, it could be worse. Absolutely. But this is my hard. I don't have to deal with those other things, at this point in my life at least. And I'm grateful for that, but that doesn't mean that what I'm going through is easy. It is hard, and it's okay to have those feelings. So giving myself that validation, it didn't make it feel better, but it did give me the freedom to accept that aspect and to grieve in some respect. This is my life, and yeah, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, but it's okay.
It's okay for life to suck and for you to admit that it sucks. I experienced a similar thing in dealing with my PTSD. The events that caused my symptoms pale in comparison to some of the stuff that I know people have gone through. But that doesn't make them any less valid. It's like you said, that's my heart.
Another thought that would niggle at my brain was um, I questioned myself about my wish to continue working. We discussed it when we early on in our marriage, whether I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I didn't have to keep working, and I really um, find satisfaction in work and doing my work, and part of that's from my family of origin. My mom was a full-time nurse in the military. My dad did more of the stay-at-home kind of stuff. So just a different perspective growing up. But I found a lot of joy in doing work. And so I did continue to work. Of course, I was working from home, and so doing the stay-at-home mom thing as well. Um, but I would question myself as things went on, whether I was enabling him somehow in whatever was going on, because it just seemed like he was struggling to stay in jobs, because of clashes in personality, and I didn't know what was going on, and it was like, was I making this worse by keeping my job? If I didn't have a job, would this be happening? Um, so I was, again, doubting myself and my decisions and what was going on. But I finally came to the conclusion that I continued to work because that was something that I wanted. And, that was kind of surprising to me. Hey, you're doing something you want, and that's okay. And it was a good thing. It did provide stability for our family, so that Brian could figure things out. And I haven't regretted that, and I'm glad that we were able to weather through things, because I don't want Brian to be miserable. And that's where he was at. He was miserable in some of those jobs, and um, so I'm glad that I have kept my jobs, but I had to go through. It took me quite a while to finally get there, to go through that thought process of, what am I doing? Am I making things worse?
Thank you for being reliable and stable. It brings me joy to hear that you're doing something you enjoy and you're not just supporting me. Because not being able to keep a job is a thing with PTSD. And I'm on my fifth type of employment in 15 years. That's not a good track record. Anymore, I just try to accept it, that happened, and what can I do to be better in the future.
I don't know exactly when this was in my period. I can't remember between what kids or whatever. It starts to get a little muddy. But there's a period that I call the decision to stay time. Because there were a lot of questions. There were a lot of things that I was looking at, going, what is going on? Who am I becoming? You know, should I continue in this relationship? There were some times where our arguments got to the point where we go, why are we doing this? And back to the fire room, and there were other things that he would say. We didn't have a name for it, but he would try to explain to me that he was stuck. Basically, that it was him doing these things, but he had kind of lost control, and it was this whole kind of out of body experience thing, kind of like what he was describing, where it's just, that's not who he wanted to be, and he didn't know how to change that. And so I felt that there was, like, he was trying really hard. And so, there was a reason to hang on and to hope. And so I had that throughout these years and throughout stuff going on. And that's a hard thing to explain to any other people, which is another reason why, I stopped sharing with people, because how do you explain to them, there's a good person in there, and I know he's there. We don't know how to figure that out, how to bring that part out and get rid of that other angry thing. So I had that as hope. And I knew there was something else going on. I didn't know what, but I knew there was a mental something going on. And I had a conversation with myself of, well, if he had come home from war physically injured, there's some pretty horrible injuries, people coming back from war, would I leave him then? That would definitely be hard. It would change how we functioned as a family, all sorts of things. Would I leave him? The answer was no. So why would I leave him if he came home with a mental injury? And so I had to ask myself that and say, well, yeah, you wouldn't. A mental injury is hard, though. You can't see it. I look at my husband and I see a normal person and think I can interact with him like a normal person. When he's fighting all sorts of demons and all sorts of stuff is going on under this, face, I have no clue. And so it's really hard, especially when you don't have any idea that you're dealing with PTSD to begin with. But it was my hard. But changing my mindset, that really helped me to cope and hold on to hope.
Thank you for staying.
You're welcome.
I said it before, you saved my life by staying. Thank you.
You're welcome. You might have heard of the 5 Love Languages book. I don't remember who the author is. I think someone gave us that book when we got married. And we did the quizzes and figured out what our love languages were and didn't really do anything with it. And then sometime in this 8 years, we revisited that, and that was really enlightening this time for us. My love language is acts of service, and I realized part of my frustration during many days where things would get frustrating, Brian would express to me that he didn't feel loved. He felt abandoned and all this stuff. And I'm sitting there going, I am screaming my love at you, and you don't get any of that? And I was just so confounded by this whole thing. And putting it into perspective of acts of service, yeah, I was making his lunches, and I was doing meals and doing the dishes, taking care of the kids and the laundry and making sure all these things are taken care of. I'm doing all these things in love for you. But it's not his love language, so I might as well have been speaking Chinese. Because his love language is touch. And I spent many nights up in the nursery with the baby. I mean, we were always doing stuff and had kids in the way. And so, like, I was definitely not giving him, speaking to him in his love language near enough. And so, yeah, he felt abandoned. And so that was huge when once we started hitting all these rocky moments and then living some life and then looking at 5 love languages, realizing, I see, I am not speaking your language.
It gave us a good focus too. Like we talked about, I don't like you, but I love you. Now we could love each other better.
Right.
And it would work better. It was, like you said, it was huge for us to revisit that 5 love languages.
Yeah. We still struggle with it, but it at least is in our head, oh, I need to be doing more of this. And also when we are speaking our own language to the other, like at least for me, I'm like, he's speaking to me in his love language, and I should recognize that.
I see it. You made me a peach pie the other day.
I did.
Thank you.
Yep. The last thing I want to bring up was we started to pray together. Brian had started, he mentioned before, a series of prayer practices first thing in the morning. And he asked at some point if we could pray together in the morning before we went our separate ways. And I should be ashamed to say that I was annoyed by this request. Partially because, sometimes he was leaving earlier than me and he would wake me up so that we could pray together, and I was tired and not very kind about that. But it really has been a really good thing. It allowed us to say aloud the things that we were hoping for, the things we were praying for the day, for each other, for ourselves, for our kids, to share those things. And it was a small step in healing and communicating and understanding each other. Just something we could do every day, even when we were mad or in a hurry or whatever else. And we continue to do that. And sometimes it gets a little rote. We kind of say the same things, but it still reminds us that we're in this together and striving for the same goal.
It's good stuff.
It is.
Folks, thanks for joining us on this hardest of videos we've done so far. Hopefully the editing goes super smooth and you like the new format with the two of us. I don't know that we'll keep it up for everyone, but we thought for this one it was important.
Thank you for listening.
I'm glad we're able to do this and I'm able to listen. It's important that you get to tell your story.
It's a pretty vulnerable place to be.
Get the demons in the light, takes the teeth out of them. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, how you gonna end this, huh?
And that's it.